people say time makes things easier. Well, I'm still waiting. I wish I could be happy. When something like that happens to you, to so many people at once, it just squashes the life out of you. These are all statements from the families of the victims of the infamous freeway killer. 21 young men lost their lives in the period of 1 year because of this one man's actions. One mother commented in a San Francisco Gate article on his penalty by saying, "When he dies, I expect to weep tears of joy for seeing him go and tears of sadness for my son." Someone who has caused this much pain and ruin in the world should never be able to walk free. Today, I would like to convince you that the United States federal government should enforce capital punishment across the nation. Capital punishment is not only cost-effective, fitting of the crimes, but it is also protected by the U.S. Constitution. When you pay taxes, do you know where your money actually goes? Well, most of us know the basic ones, such as education or fixing the roads or even paying for government officials. Most of us don't know that part of our money goes to funding a criminal stay in prison. According to the U.S. Bureau of Prisons, the average annual cost of incarceration in federal prisons in 2010 was $28,284. This is a pretty expensive stay in prison. Now, let's look at the poverty line on healthcare.org in the U.S. for 2018. In 2018, the poverty line for a family of four was $25,100. This means that 8 years ago, funding a stay in prison for a criminal was more expensive than a family of four living this year. The cost of housing an inmate has only gone up. In 2015, this cost was $31,977, and this year it is expected to reach $75,560. According to the LA Times, this amount is more than a year of schooling at Harvard University. With the cost of just one of these inmates, without the cost of one of these inmates, taxes would go down. Maybe not dramatically at first, but they would go down significantly over time. Most of us, while we know what capital punishment is, we don't really know what crimes are fitting of death. There are only 41 capital crimes in the United States that are actually punishable by death, most of them involving murder, children, or terrorism. Currently, there are only 62 prisoners on federal death row. Most of them will remain there for years to come. All of their crimes contain one or more murder. Only the worst criminals will end up going on death row, and only the worst criminals will actually end up dying for their crimes. I don't know if many of you know this, but most of the crimes on death row are actually appealed, and they don't have to actually die for their crime. Two of the most high-profile murders on death row are the Boston Marathon bomber and the LAX shooting. These are two very heinous crimes, so clearly capital punishment is not used for everyone like we think, and only people who have committed extreme crimes such as terrorism, first-degree murder, or other major offenses will actually go on death row for their crime. A current accusation surrounding capital punishment is that it is unconstitutional. However, when we look to the Constitution on constitutioncenter.org, we can, specifically the 8th and 14th Amendment, we can see that this is simply untrue. The 8th Amendment lays out explicitly, no cruel or unusual punishment should be inflicted. This statement is of course in reference to criminals. If the courts or any part of the government truly believed that this punishment was unconstitutional or cruel and unusual, they have the power to strike it down. Later on in the Constitution, criminal punishment is mentioned again in Amendment 14, Section 1, which states, "No state should make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of the citizens of the United States," which basically means that the government can't make any law that goes against your rights. If I still haven't convinced you yet that the Constitution doesn't strike down capital punishment, I would like to quote Amendment 14, Section 5, which states, "The Congress shall have the power to enforce by any appropriate legislation the provisions of this amendment." This means that if Congress truly believed that capital punishment was cruel or unusual, or they disapproved of it, they have the power to strike it down by the Constitution. As I have demonstrated, the cost of housing prisoners is very extreme and would go down significantly if capital punishment was enforced in most states. The average amount of taxes paid by a middle-class citizen today is 25 to 28%, according to federaltaxbrackets.com. About 5% of these taxes actually go to funding federal prisons. Cutting down on the amount of people in prisons would cut down on the cost of running prisons, which would cut down on taxes on all of us. So if we enforce capital punishment, we take that first step by cutting down the amount of people in prison. Supporting capital punishment would keep especially dangerous inmates from ever making it out to harm anyone again. Many criminals go through their stay in prison, get reformed, and then released into the world just to commit a crime again. A study on reference.com showed that in the United States, around 67.8% of criminals were arrested again within 3 years of their first crime. The criminal justice system clearly isn't doing as much reforming as it claims to be. An example of this is a common crime we all know of, called manslaughter. Manslaughter is one of the descriptions of killing another person, and the maximum sentence for manslaughter is 20 years. So we're letting these people who killed someone serve 20 years in prison and then just releasing them into the streets, essentially tempting them to harm someone else. Finally, the Constitution supports criminal punishment. When examining the 8th and 14th Amendment, we can see that punishments that fit the crime are supported by the U.S. Constitution. If someone kills someone, I don't know about you guys, but I think they deserve to die for their crime. The 14th Amendment also gives Congress the power to strike it down if they find the punishment unconstitutional. Yet they haven't struck it down, which means that the government does not find capital punishment unconstitutional, like lots of people would like to believe. I hope that I have convinced you that the United States federal government should enforce capital punishment across the nation. I have shown you that it's more cost effective, that it's fitting of most of the crimes that deserve it, and it is not struck down by the Constitution. So if you want to keep murderers like the freeway killer off the streets, you should support capital punishment. You could be the reason that someone else lives.